Hello, everyone. I am here yet again. I'm William Glenn Bean with the Black Religious Roundtable, of course, which is a project that has been undertaken by the Interdenominational Theological Center. We were fortunate enough to get a grant from Gilead and to deal with the HIV pandemic in the African American community. And so part of what we're doing is to enlighten and to educate. And I thought we would get the most educated, liberated, profound people that deal with HIV in the Atlanta community. And I am fortunate to be sitting here with Minister Lisa Diane White. And she's beautiful too. She's gorgeous. And Lisa White has, first and foremost, she had agreed to join the Black Religious Roundtable Advisory Board. And we were ever so delighted that we had her join us because she really is very knowledgeable about the HIV pandemic in general, not just specific to Atlanta, Georgia, but on a national level. I believe she can speak to that, and possibly on a global level. We're going to find that out too. And so part of what we're going to do is we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty and understanding from a basic level what is the HIV pandemic, or what is HIV, the disease, and what's the difference between HIV and AIDS, say. Many people don't know the difference, but we're going to talk about that today. But Miss Lisa Diane White is the Deputy Director of Sister Love, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about what Sister Love does and what that organization is, who they reach, who they speak to. She's also a minister at the Unity Fellowship Church of Greater Atlanta. Did I say that correct?
You did.
Yeah, okay. And then, of course, her area of expertise is HIV, intergenerational relationships, and the intimate partner violence. And they're both different, of course. And we want you to speak to both because I think somehow they're going to somewhat support each other in the message that we have to bring to the people. So, Lisa,
yeah.
I give you voice. Tell us a little bit about who you are, please.
Hey, I'm Lisa Diane White, and I've been in the field of HIV for about 15, 16 years, and I work with Sister Love Incorporated. That has been the place where I've been doing this work. I also work with the National Black Women's Health Project, so I've always been looking at the health of Black women and looking at reproductive health. But as a Black feminist, I understand that when you're looking at the health of Black women, that you're also looking at the health of Black women, their families, and their communities, because Black women don't come by themselves. And so when I think about doing feminist work, I uplift the work of women who uplift the work of their families, their children, their partnerships, and their community. And that's what feminism for me means, is the liberation of us all. So even as I look at my new work as a brand new minister, I'm also looking at the liberation in terms of my relationship with Christianity, because that's the focus. But I'm looking at my own spirituality and how Christianity has been used to oppress us as a people or grow us as a people. It just depends on when and where you enter. But wherever your story is, I invite you to tell your story, and that's what I do in the work that I'm here now to do, is to talk about the story of the work that I do, how I've grown as in my own spiritual and religious work, and how I've grown in my education around talking about HIV, the research about it, the stigma about it, the places that it's been hard to have conversations about. I'm trying to, liberate the conversations of HIV as well.
Wow, that was a mouthful. And we're going to have to revisit some of that because, of course, with the Black Religious Roundtable, we are addressing the HIV pandemic in the faith-based community, okay, which is not just Christianity, but it's Muslim faith, Jewish faith, any higher spiritual elevation or being faith, because there's something greater than us, of course. And so, but your go-to in understanding or your faith is Christianity. Is that correct?
And I mean, even as we, narrow it down, I would say that my faith is about, my church is affiliated with the teachings of Jesus the Christ, but my work is affiliated with love. How do I live on this planet? How do I show love? How do I manifest love? How do I love ye, my brother and sister and community, as I love myself? And so I'm doing the work of loving me, loving you, and so everything that I do is filtered through that lens, in terms of a lens of love. And so I'm very open because I believe that that the openness of love is where I come from. So your teachings, your belief, all of those, it did not stop there. It's us. It didn't stop with the Bible writers. It did not stop at any place. I believe in what you believe, and I respect that and want you to feel respected and loved in any conversation that I have about you. So even as I label myself, I also label myself in love.
Wow. You label yourself in love for love,
Yeah.
which is key and critical. Now, with your understanding of love as you know it and understand it as your faith.
Yes.
How does this, let's kind of transition to how this deals with the pandemic, HIV pandemic. But before we even integrate that, why don't you tell us a little bit about the HIV pandemic disease? What is it? How is it communicated? What communities does it affect the most?
Well, as I look at HIV, it's a conversation that many of us are having, some of us are having, none of us are having. In my world, I have conversations about HIV because that's my work. In the world that I live in, people don't have conversations about HIV. We don't have conversations about sex and sexuality. If we do, they're not talking about the intimacy of it, the realities of it. There's a lot of stigma in talking about sex, and there's stigma talking about all the ways that HIV may be transmitted. So if we start talking about HIV, it's a pandemic that we who work in HIV have been familiar with for 40 years plus, that, HIV is human, immunovirus, HIV. But when we first heard about it, we didn't know what it was. We didn't know. We were like, it's you get it if you use heroin, you get it if you gay, you get it if you white, you get it if you have sex with men who have sex with men, you get it if you're from Haiti. All the kind of myths that we get when we first learn about a pandemic. We can look at this COVID pandemic and understand why it's so hard to get good information, accurate information, changing information. Research is constantly changing. So HIV, human immunodeficiency virus, HIV. Now that's a mouthful.
Right. So
you just know that it's those things. And then if we talk about AIDS, it's acquired immune deficiency syndrome, but we don't really, those were also words used to I guess, discriminate and to increase stigma and to indicate death, disease, and dying. And so as we've learned about HIV, it's a range. You get exposed to HIV, you have high viral loads and you can transmit quickly. And then your viral load drops and then you begin to live with HIV. But if we now know that if you are treated early, that you can treat it, that you can treat it where there's no risk of transmission. There is, you used to go to AIDS and you'd have a certain CD4 count or a certain viral load, but if you take your medicine, your viral load drops. If you take your medicine, your viral load drops until there's no risk of transmission. We learn these things. If you don't take your medication, or if you're not on the right medication, your viral load may rise. And then if your viral load rises, then the possibility of transmission increases. And so we have to look at it. But the fact remains is that it's humans. And then if we look at how we talk about it, if we don't talk about it from a place of love, but we talk about it from a place of you're diseased, you're a vector of death and gloom, and sex is death and gloom. We can have conversations about people who may use drugs and injectable drugs and how HIV may be transmitted. So we've had to begin to have these conversations that HIV is transmitted by sexual activity. So you can tell if we're talking about the faith community, a lot of conversations about sex is not happening in the faith community.
Do we talk about HIV that was my next question. Do we talk about the HIV pandemic in the church enough?
If you do, you do. If you don't, you don't. So I don't want to come in and say people are not doing something, because people are doing things.
Okay.
And people are not doing things. And so if you're talking about it in your community, people have ministries, lots of ministries. And there are people who don't talk about it at all. There are people who I don't need to talk about it. I'm married, or I'm protected, or I'm this, or I'm that. And so that means you don't know how HIV is transmitted. We're talking about HIV transmission. We're not talking about monogamy. We're not talking about fidelity. We're not talking about...
And we have to have all those conversations. So, because historically, back in the day, when one would speak of or think of HIV, you would think of the gay community.
Well, that's how it was traditionally.
Mm-hmm.
You had to be, like I said, a heroin addict. You had to be Haitian. You had to be gay, mm-hmm. homosexual. Mm-hmm. And then, as I learned coming into this work that, I began to do groups and clinics with women who were living with HIV, and we weren't even having conversations about that. And the definitions of what HIV was didn't include some of the things that women were getting, such as cervical cancer, and so it was so women weren't able to get the kind of disability and the treatment and the exposure that was needed to understand what's happening. And so our community kind of got missed. So we got missed.
Do you think that, one can think of several reasons why our community may have been missed. When the pandemic first came out, I think there was tons of misinformation. Correct. I think when the medications came out, I think they spoke to a certain demographic. But I also think, now this is just me now, mm-hmm. I also think that because the church found sex to be a taboo topic, sex is something you just do not speak about in church.
No, I didn't speak about homosexuality.
Or homosexuality.
Or drug use.
Or drug use. And so the opportunities...
They were missed.
They were missed.
And if you were inside the church, they may have been missed. And if you were outside of the church, even as we talk about sex now in the workshops that I do, people are uncomfortable talking about sex. People don't talk about drug use, injection drug use.
People are uncomfortable talking about sex? You think? To what degree?
The fact that they're having it, the fact that they're not having it, the fact that they have lots of it, the fact that they have many sexual encounters of different types. We don't happily share those things. There's some, you have more than one sex partner, the eyebrows go up and up and up the more you name,
Do we need to come more liberal or free in our thinking with regards to sex in order to have a deeper conversation about HIV? Do you think?
To talk about HIV, really, sometimes you really need to talk about sex. If I can't talk to you about sex, then I can't talk to you about how HIV may be transmitted. I just simply can't. It's not floating around in the air. So you might want to know how it's transmitted, and it's transmitted through sexual fluids and body fluids. So how do I talk about that? How do I talk about the parts? If I say the word vagina and you start screaming, there's children in this room. This is a church. We can't use those terms, but I use the anatomy name. And that scared you. I used that word in a meeting and people went running. And I thought, oh.
Vagina?
Yes. And I was like, what should I have used? Hoo-hoo, pocketbook? What would have made... But then if I'm talking about your pocketbook, you don't know which one. So it's all these things, what do you call it? Mm-hmm. But I've got to name it for you to figure out how to take care of it and to reduce the risk of transmission. And then the language of risk, I just use that word. Everything about risk and sex and relationships, they don't go together. How we talk about everything is being so risky. So there's so many areas that we're learning. There's so much stigma that was originally laid in this initial pandemic that it is hard to undo all of that. Even when people are now diagnosed with HIV, they're immediately afraid that they're going to die. They are afraid that they will never be loved again. Some, like, I'm going to run out and have as much sex as I can and give it to everybody because somebody gave it to me. Some people are like, everybody has it, it ain't no big deal. You know, it just depends on when and where you enter into the conversation. And as I've learned in this new pandemic, everything about it is new and scary. And so I'm realizing that all that new and scariness and how we initially talk about it impacts it in the long run. And so in the conversations, if you saw HIV long ago with all white gay men, then that's how you see it. If you see it as white gay men, then you will never think I'm talking to you when you hear the acronym HIV. You will never think I'm talking to you. And so then all of a sudden it's like, well, we're talking to the gay community. Then homophobia comes in. All y'all going to hell. Or all the people who are gay. See, this is an abomination. All these terms and things that we've had. And as we've learned to even liberate those conversations, if you have, then how do you talk about it? So I don't want to assume that no one is having these conversations, and I don't want to assume that people are not having very thoughtful conversations. And I also have to look at that we're having conversations that are harmful and stigmatizing. We're having conversations that are liberating. So we're trying to talk about HIV. Humans get it. Not dogs, not cats, not mosquitoes, not monkeys. Now all these people can get, but we're talking about human. HIV is human. Now if I'm talking about monkey HIV, that's not the same thing. I'm talking about humans. So who gets it? Human. So when I say humans, that's you, that's me. You can't separate yourself out unless you have not been defined as a human. Now, where do we go with the conversation? How might you be exposed to HIV? Now I have to talk about that. And to talk about that, I have to talk about things we may not talk about historically. Sex, vaginas, body parts, penis, things that, scare people. I have to talk about fluids.
Does it scare people really, you think?
It depends on who you are.
And if I were to ask you, what is the state of affairs today with regards to HIV in the African American community or the community at large? Where do we stand?
I think if you are any type of, I'm a public health educator and advocate. So my understanding is anything that impacts the Black community, it impacts it hard. And so when you look at why does that happen, we have to look at poverty. We have to look at racism, white supremacy, access to care, treatment, housing, homelessness.
White supremacy?
White supremacy, racism, how the power of whites who practice, oppression behavior, how that impacts our ability, to receive good health care. What types of, things do we have in our community that promote health? Good grocery stores, access to good schools, access to grocery stores, healthy, options are there in our communities? Are our communities riddled with crime and, policing, over-policing? All of those things impact our ability to be well as a people. So then you bring in the disease of any kind, then that all of those things, intertwine, and all of those oppressive factors, and the impact on our health is dismal. So you can look at, if you're looking at the South and we're talking about faith, communities, this is the Bible Belt, and we look at so many things that the Bible has been used in ways to oppress and to educate, as opposed to love and to liberate, so.
To oppress and educate, as opposed to, say that again, love and liberate, was it? Yeah, okay. Wow.
So, we have to look at those things. And so I would try to bring that message to the church as well about how to take a doctrine that may have been oppressive and to educate and liberate, as opposed to, information can be used to harm as opposed to free, so.
Now, in the looking at it from a gender perspective before we look at it from a race perspective, the vast majority, though, of people who are infected with HIV are male. Yes?
When we're looking at our community, when we're looking at the African American community, period, we have higher rates of HIV than we are part of the population. So, and if you go to different parts of the community, at one point, I think women are about 13% of as far as But then you're looking at a percentage of, and it decreases or increases depending on what part of the country you're in. When you're looking at men who have sex with men, those rates are higher, and we need to put a lot of education and information in the community to talk about it. Not talk about homophobia, not talk about the plague and pestilence and all of those things. We need to talk about HIV and how it's transmitted and why is it transmitted more in the Black gay community. Those conversations are had best by people who are living in those communities, and at the same time they're had by people who understand that the rates are high. And then what must we do? We must talk about it and educate people about the fact that it's happening and do something about it. If you're in a church and you talk about it, they're already telling you what's going to happen to you, so either you're going to jail or hell.
So I wouldn't want to talk about it if that's the case. And that's how it affects many people, right?
Correct.
It's either hell or did you say?
Or jail.
Or jail. And that's no way to educate.
That's not, you're not going to educate. So to begin conversations in schools, we're not having sexual education classes that are talking about those things. So if you're not talking about it in school, you're not talking about it in church, we're talking about an entire bubble of oppression that impacts us as a community. And so by the time we talk about a Black community, we're talking about men who have sex with men. If we're talking about everybody being gay, I would say that the conversations are different.
Is HIV still, because now there are so many medications out there, where one can become undetectable, and if you're undetectable, then it's almost impossible to transmit it at that point. And so I know in the African American same gender loving community, there's a sort of liberation and freedom that goes along with that. And so you see a spike in sex and everything else. Do you think that first of all, let me ask this question. How powerful are the medications now for HIV? How powerful are they?
I mean, research is ongoing, and before it was literally a death sentence. You were diagnosed and you died unless you were one of those people who didn't, the virus didn't progress in your body, and we found out about those people because we found out they were impacted and didn't die, but folks did.
So with the medications today in treating HIV, they're powerful.
They are powerful, but we also have to understand that it's medication and it's a regimen that's daily, and some people it doesn't work, and some people it does. So we want to talk about the fact that you cannot die, but Black people are still dying from HIV. So
is it because they don't have access to the medicine, or is it because, even in spite of taking the medicine, they're dying? Is that what you're saying? It may be because
you don't have access. It may be because your virus is resistant to that particular medication and it's not working for you, that you have been on certain, regimens that no longer work. But for the majority of people, we have really good drugs that you can take now to prevent the transmission. And your viral load can drop, and we find that you are unable to transmit the virus. We've looked at, research that looked at 3,000 plus sex act, no transmission as far as people who were in that study. So, I mean, this is good research, good science.
Yes. Now, the prospect of dying from HIV has been minimized drastically because the powerful drugs that are now available. So what is the conversation now? So is the conversation you don't want to pass on HIV because, well, it's no longer a death sentence if you take the medication as a regular regimen. You do have exceptions to the rule, of course. Mm-hmm. But if you take the regimens the way you're supposed to be taking the medication, then it's really not a death sentence as it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. So what is the conversation now? Are we just informing people about HIV, or what is the consequence now of being HIV positive? What is the message? Because before it was fear. We educated people through fear. What are we doing now?
Fear is still always a message, and so we're constantly trying to educate people with good information. But good information is only as good as your ability to process that. Even telling somebody you can just take a pill, people who want to take a pill every day, Some people don't. Matter of fact, if you look at how we take pills, I still have peers who are like, I got more antibiotic left at the end of the regimen. I shouldn't have anything. I've got people who's like, would you like one of my pills? I'm sharing stuff. So that means you're not taking your medicine as prescribed.
Right.
If you're not taking it as prescribed, then this place that I'm talking about, treatment as prevention, your viral load will continue to rise, and your ability to transmit HIV is also
so what is
increased.
what is our message now?
Our
The message before was, if you don't take the medication, you'll die. Is it more now about a self-esteem, self-worth message, in the sense that, yes, there's medication out there, but you want to be kinder to your body? Yes, but even though the HIV virus is undetectable, it's still taking medication, which in the long term may have adverse effects on your body. So it really is about your taking medication or preventing it for self-love and self-care.
Well, the message is prevention. That's the message. Prevention. So what does that mean? Prevention of acquiring and prevention of transmission. The message is new research. The message is new drugs. The message is, what can we do to prevent the transmission of HIV? That's the message. Now, all the things that impact the message. Access to the medication, access to the to treatment or prevention, your ability to communicate in a relationship, to talk about ways that you may prevent it. What are some of the things that you may do to prevent it? You may use a condom. You may decide to abstain. You may use a pre-exposure prophylaxis, take a pill to prevent it. All these things are more conversations that you have to have with somebody who has that knowledge. Again, the conversation is prevention.
The Black Religious Roundtable, we're going to work with the faith community, engage them in dialogue, so that they can enlighten their community, their church, their family on the, I would say, status or situation of HIV. So if you had to, from a faith-based perspective or Christian perspective, you come from a place of love. And so fundamentally, as we move forward and having this discussion about the pandemic HIV, we must do it in the name of love and with love.
Right.
Correct?
And as you describe love, love looks like all it looks like in your life. Whether it's an initiation sex party, whether it's a relationship with someone who looks like you, whether it's a man or a female or someone who's trans or, gay or lesbian, or how do you define yourself? But the fact is that you get to name yourself. And then who do you love? And then how in that loving relationship may you be at risk for HIV, exposed to HIV, prevent the transmission of HIV, talk about HIV with not coming from a perspective of what you gonna do, you might get HIV, as opposed to I wanna love you.
I think the final portion of this discussion is this, that as we educate, motivate, enlighten communities and leaders about HIV, it has to come from a place of love.
It cannot be from a place of fear, doom, gloom, oppression.
It has
stigma.
to come from a place of love.
It has to come from a place of love. None of those things keep you close to me to get the message and for you to learn how to move in love. None of whatever the conversation is. So whatever your age, your position in life, your place, your religion, your belief, HIV doesn't care. And so how do I talk to you about HIV from a place that you matter, your story matters, and that you are nothing but love? That's my message.
Wow. Well, I appreciate this conversation. It has been a great conversation, and I hope that all of you would have gotten something from the discussion. If you didn't get anything else from this discussion, and that is, as we move forward and as we do our work surrounding the HIV pandemic, it has to come from a place of love, period. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So one more time, if someone wants to be in contact with you to have further conversation about HIV today, in the community today, weary with medications, and how we might have that conversation in any space, not only just faith-based space, but in any space, classrooms and what have you. How can they be in contact with you?
You can contact me personally at Lisa Diane White, LISADIANE White @gmail.com, and I can have more conversation. You can also contact me at my agency, Sister Love, lwhite@sisterlove.org, and we can talk about a healthy love party. We can talk about HIV prevention information, all types of things that we're doing. So there's all kind of fun ways to talk about.
Thank you
prevention.
so much. This has been ever so enlightening. Thank you, thank you.
Much.
And I'll be talking to all of you advisory board members very, very, very soon. In the same way that I had a conversation with Lisa White, I hope to have a conversation with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.